Ok, bomo začeli. Publika je ogromna, še več jo bo, ker bomo snemali, tako da si bojo pol tisti, ki niso prisotni, stvari ogledali. To seanso smo prepustili študentom, da si sami organizirajo in da tudi sami naredijo vrstni red, tako da moja pedagoška malenkost je bila tukaj, navzoča sem to, da se to naredi. Tako da jaz z tem zaključim in predajam Karli, da celo stvar spele skupaj z študenti iz tujine, ki so pripravili papir in seveda tudi nekaterimi študenti iz naše fakultete in drugih fakultet. Toliko, Karla, izvoli.
So, hi everyone, as Andrej already mentioned, so as Andrej already mentioned, we are about to start our first thematic group with Jean, Rafael, Clara, and Luca. Every single presenter has 5 minutes to present his research. And then once everyone in a single thematic group is done, then we turn to you with questions, comments, feedback, and so on. So, Jean, if you're ready, you can start.
Yeah. Hello. It's not stressful to be first at all, so I'm just gonna dive in. So a bit of background before I begin. My primary topic of interest outside of this summer school are factors of success for new and emerging parties. So this is connected with a phenomenon we have observed in Slovenia in the past couple of election cycles, where we saw the so-called dominance of new faces. So what this means is that the past couple of cycles, we saw that new parties triumphed on the elections for the government. And this is specifically for the middle left parties. And this was quite interesting because what happens is they triumph, they win, and then they inevitably disappoint us in a year or two, and we need to have a new savior, a new party, a new face who will come in and deal with all the previous mess they made. So currently we're on our 4th iteration, so wish us luck. So how does this all connect with why I'm here? Well, I was talking to Professor Lukšić at a seminar, and we were discussing new parties as a concept. And in the past decades, a very persistent category of new parties were green parties, So that brought me here and started researching and analyzing the specific discourses green parties have, new green parties have, and what could be the factors of their success. So the goals of this research are twofold. Firstly, with this paper, we want to expand the discussions on the politics of ecology, more specifically how new green parties establish themselves in these institutionalized parliamentary systems and the circumstances that are associated with them getting into a governing body. And secondly, we want to analyze these factors of success of new political parties and then see how they coincide with green new parties and to see if the discourse that green new parties use is beneficial and relates to these factors as such. And in the end, we will also take a look at Slovenia's green parties and see how they fared with these factors. Spoiler alert, it's not great. So with the research questions in mind, the firstly is, what are the key factors of success? So that is the first question we need to answer of new political parties. Secondly, how has political ecology discourse evolved through the years, and how has that influenced the way that green parties present themselves during elections? And thirdly, is Slovenia's national green discourse specific in ways that allows these green parties to either be more successful or less successful than their contemporaries throughout Europe? The methodology that we're going to use in this paper is the explanatory scientific method with an emphasis on relevant research intersection between a few key literatures. For example, the ecological political thought of Drižek, and Bomberg's analysis of green political parties. Those two will then be cross-analyzed with some of our national authors who basically analyze the development of Slovenian green parties in a comparative perspective. Besides these main authors, we'll also be looking at some empirical data, which is opinion polls. So we'll be interested, like, do Slovenians care about environmental issues? And then does that relate to election results for the green parties themselves? Also, while there were obviously all very insightful lectures on this summer school, one in particular by Darko Nadic was super insightful about this topic, where he also talked about how the parliamentization of green parties is happening in Serbia. So after this summer school, we'll also be looking at some of his literature and seeing if we can add it on top of what we already have. So going just quickly through, because I think I have 2 more minutes left, about how this paper will be structured. The first part will be about these factors of success. So generally, we have these institutional factors and non-institutional factors. By institutional, we mean like type of electoral system, what is the degree of cooperation between parties, what are the laws about financing, what is the formation of these parties, etc. And here we see that these generally apply to all parties the same. So green parties don't actually have a disadvantage or a disadvantage. Where we see that the major differentiation happens is with non-institutional factors of success. And here we notice the major one being that a big factor is that new parties, go figure, talk about new issues, new things, new challenges that old parties weren't able to tackle before. And here we see that green parties, as we'll see in the second part, have a distinct advantage, I would say, because they have a concrete discourse about saving the planet, restructuring the way we act as a capitalistic society in order to not destroy ourselves in a couple of years. Regarding other non-institutional factors, we also have like general political dissatisfaction. The more we're dissatisfied with our current party system or parties, the more we're likely to vote for something new. The role of media is important. And a big one that's being talked about recently more and more is the personification of politics. So does a Green Party have like the power of a charismatic leader that would somehow drive forward all these messages that it has? So for the further purposes of this paper, we'll be seeing how they connect with the prevailing political discourse regarding political ecology, which is like the main part of the second part of the paper, which is basically saying that what is green political discourse, Obviously, this is a social issue that has consistently emerged as a central theme throughout the decades. And we have Drizek on one side saying that this is like an extremely complex system of issues, because on one hand, it's an ecosystem, and on the other hand, it's a social system. And then we need to see how these two things come together. And then basically we have Bloomberg adding on to that, saying that it's basically the green political paradigm presents a fundamental critique of modern industry society by emphasizing environmental, social, and human reproduction of our economic growth. Now, the catch-22 here is that there's a very clear strategic dilemma when it comes to green parties, because on one hand, this is, in a sense, a very radical movement. Green movements, they want change, stop doing this. We need to reassess how we do that. While on the other hand, if you want to be successful in a parliamentary system as a party, you need to make compromises, you need to make coalitions. You maybe try to not be as radical to get the votes, to get into parliament, and then maybe enact the changes that you want. So a core strategic dilemma has remained, It's either shift from radicalism that undermines their distinctiveness and this newness, which we will explain is a factor of success, or on the other hand, don't adapt and endanger your electoral decline. That brings us to the third part really shortly, what happened in Slovenia. So here we'll be looking at Slovenia's national politics and ecological discourse. Firstly, a really good way to look at it is that from the 70s on, all public opinion polls showed that Slovenians care deeply about the environment, nature, forests, that is very much who we are, as a nation. We care about them. So You would think that our green parties would be super successful because of that. But to quote Professor Nadic very bluntly, the answer is no, it does not. The biggest success of our green parties that we saw was in the 90s, actually in the first multi-party elections, where the Greens of Slovenia achieved 8.8% of the vote and got 8 seats. And then the paper will delve into all the internal turmoil, external turmoil, lack of charismatic leaders, lack of using mediatization, to explain that after that, there was no relevant success of these parties whatsoever. If we exclude the example in 2004, where a coalition of Združena Levica had one member that from the Green Party itself that was able to get into parliament. And then the paper will conclude with conclusions by weighing these institutional and non-institutional factors and seeing how it all comes together in Slovenia. Yeah, that's my paper.
Rafael, and then any question, feedback, you can just write it down and we'll come to that later. Or you can also use this one.
Do you hear me? Okay. Okay. Help me. Now it's good. Morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to say thank you to both organizing and scientific committees, which afford us the opportunity to be here. The research report I'm presenting here aims to highlight the critical perspective of the main climate movements, such as Extinction Rebellion and Fridays for Future, on the global climate governance, particularly with regard to the Conference of the Parties system, and on the capitalism that must be overcome following the master frame of the climate justice. This paper is part of my doctoral thesis, which is focused on the development of two interconnected trajectories of analysis. The first is centered on the investigation of the main characteristics of intergovernmental policies counter the ecological crisis. The second is centered on protest and opposition platforms supported by the climate movements. To conduct the qualitative research on climate movements, I have prepared a panel of privileged witnesses, activists of movements which fight the ecological crisis, that I have provided with 50 semi-structured interviews. My empirical research as also first thanks to the experiences of participant observation at assemblies and protest mobilizations of the climate movements conducted in Milan and in Glasgow on the occasion respectively of the pre-COP26 and COP26. Furthermore, I also experienced participant observation in Turin, climate social camp, and in Naples, the last global climate strike. So, starting by the social movements literature, the political ecology studies, and the first outcomes of my research, I argued that in the climate activist view, the intergovernmental policy arena of the Conference of the Parties is not adequate to address the ecological crisis. The Conference of the Parties system is considered as an harmful and a failure meeting. Harmful because it is not a democratic process, and the power position of both main states and big companies are maintained. In this logic, there is not an ecological perspective, and so the people and the areas most affected by the climate change are not protected enough. Only the carbon markets and new technology tools are implemented, and this fact could be dangerous for the environment. And failure, because over the last 3 decades, the greenhouse gas emissions have grown up. And with the current environmental policies in force, the temperature will increase. Now, shifting to the other part of this paper, according to the climate activists, it is not enough implementing some specific politics to act efficiently in the fight of the climate change, because it is necessary to go beyond the capitalistic system by pursuing the achievement of the climate justice. The climate justice is the dominant frame of the collective action negotiated by the numerous souls composing the climate movement. Both Fridays for Future and Extinction Rebellion tend to adopt an holistic approach in solving the ecological crisis, which is able to prepare intersectional struggles with regard to environmental, workers, gender, anti-racist, anti-speciesism, and so on issues, in order to undermine the dominant system of the capitalism, which has the sole purpose of making profit at the expenses of environmental and social devastation. For these reasons, Fridays for Future and Extinction Rebellion activists do not define themselves as merely environmentalists, precisely because this term hides a sectoral nature of the claims. It is therefore more appropriate to refer to these organized groups of civil society as ecological movements which fight for climate justice. I have finished. Thank you for attention.
Okay. Hi, and thank you again for the organization of the summer school and for you for being here in this time of the morning. Thanks. So I thought of sharing with you some ongoing work on collaborative transitions. And I will not explain so much methods and so, but you can ask me questions about it, because I thought of shaping it more around an analogy, which is a maritime analogy. So in navigating sustainability challenges, we are not all on the same boat. There is a variety of different boats on the sea. There are some oil tankers, there are some migrants vessels, and there are different sizes and different degrees of power. And we all know that incumbent actors tend to be on big boats or cruise ships that tend to provide structures to the system, maintain business as usual, and sometimes, hopefully, also optimize it a bit. And there are some highly problematic cruise ships, but there are also some good big boats that provide public services and ensure that day-to-day activities in the system work smoothly. For example, we could have the energy system. The issue also with this type of good boats is that they transform very slowly through incremental of path dependence modalities of change. And that's why we need something else. So we suggest introducing also smaller and nimbler boats, like activist kayaks, pirate ships, or even exploration units that are sent out by big boats to learn how to innovate. And we need to figure out how to make it work, because they work with very different logics. They tend to think with a multiplicity of voices. They tend to think beyond the current system to identify not only the symptoms, but also go deep in finding the underlying causes and the potential leverage points. And they think ahead to also envisage new possibilities, and with this to bring about deep and broad transformations. And all of this is an analogy developed by Jon Holmberg and Johan Holmen in the Expedition Cruise Ship Framework, which is based on different logics that can be used in the governance of complex systems to maintain or transform them. And we are currently working on how we can scale these explorations to the cruise ship level, or if you are familiar with the multi-level perspective, with the regime level. And more specifically, for those of you that work with transition theories, we work at the intersection point of the X-curve framework, in which new sustainable initiatives need to scale up, and unsustainable ones are phasing down. And we're really interested in what happens when they encounter each other and either replace or transform. So going back to the maritime analogy, we call this point docking station, which is a platform for transformative learning between the expedition and the cruise ship. And we are specifically working on this because it doesn't exist yet in the literature. It's more of a sensitizing concept that is emerging from the experiences and needs of practitioners. So we're working with Swedish citizens, municipalities, counties, and public sector organizations that are working together to bring about systemic change. And we're specifically focusing on understanding and strengthening engagement of societal actors in these docking processes. So preliminary results so far indicate that engagement in docking can happen in 3 different ways. First of all, there can be a simple form of involvement in the preparation phase, in which societal actors are mostly consulted, or there are some mutual learning projects. But more interesting, there is also some forms of participation in the expedition and cruise ship processes, or there can be some forms of co-creation in the docking phases. And to make this a bit more tangible, an example of participation is given by Ale municipality, which involved more than 200 citizens in understanding the challenge of inequalities of income, education, and life expectancy. And they tried to really develop together also a solution for it. Then COVID hit, so this expedition didn't really finish. But another example of co-creation in docking processes is given by Örebro municipality, that really explore with teachers, pupils from different ages and employers the challenge of youth unemployment. And they're really trying together to dock the learning and transform the cruise ship of the educational system. So far from our analysis, it seems that docking and engagement in docking can really help to navigate sustainability challenges, and to some extent can also be a first step in overcoming some inequalities. But there is, of course, a lot to still unpack and develop. I'm soon about to start a cycle of action research to really work with the participants to understand how we can strengthen this engagement. But yeah, there is still a lot to explore. So if you have any suggestions or ideas, just please let me know. Thank you.
Good morning. Is it okay? Yeah. Good morning. I have a presentation. Unlike my professor Nadic, I actually don't think that PowerPoint presentations are karaoke for professors. It actually can be quite useful, or at least it's for me. The topic of my paper was green transition in Serbia, many left behind. You can already start thinking about some of my conclusions, but my idea of this paper was to discuss or try evaluating is green transition in Serbia just, and if is, why it is, if it's not, why it's not. I would like to provide you a few facts at the beginning just for the context. So since 2012, Serbia had 6 governments, and we changed 5 ministers in charge for the environmental issues. Some of them were working on mining and environment, some of them agriculture and environment, but the last several terms, so last 3 terms, we have just environmental protection ministry. Average term of the ministry in charge for the environment was approximately 2 years, meaning that it's hard to think about even mid-term and not to talk about long-term issues or goals or visions that we should think about. We had a lack of continuity, obvious lack of continuity, despite the fact that the coalition in power did not change in any way over those 11 years. Ministers mostly argued each other, so the predecessors were attacking the ones before them, the ones after them. I have several examples of that in my paper. But important fact is that this kind of political context actually provided a whole layer of problems related to a strategic approach to environmental protection, meaning that Serbia doesn't have any kind of strategies related to green transition. We finally adopted in June the strategy of low carbon development until 2030. The problem is that, yeah, we did adopt the strategy, which is actually not totally in line with the other strategies we have, or even with some of the laws, but action plan will wait until 2024. So we can't even talk about how it's going to look like to implement these things. And the strategy itself, besides mentioning just climate vision at 2 places, doesn't deal with justice in any way or emphasize it as something important. As this is the situation and I don't have the roof documents or comprehensive approach to green transition in Serbia, I decided to use 2 policies which are heavily promoted by the government over the past 3 years as a lackmus to show how transition will look like if they keep doing things the way they did with these 2 policies. The first one is electric vehicle subsidies, and the second one is energetic efficiency and renovation subsidies. As we have just 5 minutes, I decided to talk more about electric vehicle subsidies because a lot of speakers in previous days talked a lot about the problems related to renovation and energetic efficiency, so I wouldn't have a lot of things to say besides presenting the case of Serbia. Again, before saying more about the policy itself, there's several facts that I think you need to know. Serbia imports 150,000 used cars every year. 50% of those imported cars are Euro 3 standard or below. So most of the trash from Europe comes to us because we need cheap cars, and most wanted cars in Serbia are the ones in a price range in 1,000 to 2,000 euros. 5,000+ euros cars have a share of several percent when we're talking about used cars in Serbia. 30,000 new cars is bought every year, but still average age of the vehicle in Serbia is 18 years. So you can imagine how it looks like and what are the consequences. Electric vehicle subsidies were here placed for different reasons, but here's how policy looks like. So you have maximum subsidy of 5,000 euros. And in 3 years, it resulted with 1,183 vehicles bought, and we still have less than 17,000 electric and hybrid vehicles in total, which is 0.1% of the total number of vehicles in Serbia. I purposely say vehicle despite the fact that government is constantly talking about cars, but the subsidies itself is not only for the cars, but also for bikes, motorbikes, easy motorbikes, or even transport vehicles and like vans and buses, etc., which actually participate even less in the whole structure of the vehicles that are being bought over the past several years. So, what does the government say? The government says that we do this to improve the quality of air, because quality of air is indeed a problem in Serbia, and increase usage of environmentally acceptable means of the transport. This is quote. One of the important facts to note, Professor Nadic mentioned the environmental protests and the problems we had in Serbia, political conflicts organized around the environmental issues, and these both policies are coming in the aftermath of those protests in order to try to provide the facts or the proofs that, yeah, we do deal with the environment, we do care about the environment. And air pollution is one of crucial problems when it's up to environment in Serbia. And when you look at this policy and say, yeah, we want to improve the air quality, in a way it can make sense. Belgrade is one of the cities on top polluted cities global list, like every 2 or 3 weeks, especially during the winter time. But not just Belgrade. Valjevo, Bor, some other cities as well are usually on top European list. You can see the concentration in the Balkans and most of that in Serbia of poor air quality. And yeah, it can make sense unless you dig deeper. Actually, road traffic doesn't influence that much with air pollution in Serbia. When we're talking, for instance, about PM10 particles, just 5% of PM10 particles are coming from road traffic. With PM2.5, it's even less. However, besides little or no influence to pollution, comparing to energy production, it's almost like you can forget about it. Energy production, as you can see here, is 51%. You have other things participating in PM particles, for instance, emissions. But generally comparing to energy industry, and especially electricity industry in Serbia, it's one of the key problems. So, costs for this policy, and this is like one part of key part of my conclusion. When we're talking about these policies in Serbia, costs are really shared by many and benefits are consumed by few. We basically provide subsidies who are targeting already wealthy individuals capable of buying electric car anyway, and I do believe that most of you know, or everyone here knows that those cars are still not cheap or that easily affordable, or at least not in Serbia. One of the other things that, or facts that we should consider, especially when it's up to the other policy, which I said I'm not going to talk about, is that those funds are provided by from loans taken by the state again, so we need to pay it back. Public transport in these policies is completely neglected. No one takes a lot of care about it, especially outside of the Belgrade. And eventually, it was easy to conclude that these policies are political measure for specific voters. There's a whole group of voters who are well situated, living above the average, who are not working in public sector, who are not that easy to control for the current parties in the government. And we do have a democracy issue in Serbia, which I'm not going to bother you with. But this is one of the ways to provide some kind of benefit for that group of voters in order to make sure that they will vote for you. So that was my whole presentation and my paper, so thank you.
Thank you, Luca. Maybe if we start with a group, if anyone has a question or comment for someone else of the co-presenters. Otherwise, we can also turn to the publics if anyone has anything, like who wants to break the ice. Uh-huh.
Is it okay if I start? Sorry, just listening to you. Thank you very much, first of all, for your presentation. I know how challenging it is to present a large topic just in 5 minutes, so congratulations for making it. I have one question for each of you, just because I took some notes when you were talking. So for the first speaker, I just wanted to know if you make some comparison with other countries, like Germany, where the Green Party has been always very, let's say, powerful and has been there from time to time in the government, and whether or not you question also, or you apply your questions, not only at the national level, but also at subnational level. And I'm sorry, I'm going to take the French example again. But for example, in France, at national level, the Green Party is not really elected. But when you look at the subnational levels, they are very more powerful. I mean, especially in big cities, for example. So I was wondering if you look at this level. Shall I go with all my questions and you answer afterwards? Yeah, okay. So for the second speaker, I would like to know, because there are, I think, a few PhD students and master's students here who may be at the beginning of their research. I was wondering what kind of criteria you had to choose the two movements you are studying in your research, and whether, because the results you told us today were more global, to say, okay, the discourse is against COP and more into some other kinds of direction. But do you compare the discourses, because they are very different? Do you compare the background of the people inside the movement, or you just look at the results, the outcomes of the movement? I was wondering which part you were more interested in. for the third speaker. Thank you very much. I didn't know about this experience, so I will check it out. So I don't have much question because I don't know much about it. But you mentioned an experiment where 200 citizens were involved. And as you know, my interest is to know whether it's inclusive or not. So I was wondering if in this kind of project, co-creation, co-design has been quite spread out everywhere also, but very often the co-creation is limited to a certain group of people. And I just wanted to know if this specific experience, then there is a broader access to other usual suspects, I would say. And for the third speaker, thank you for the Serbian case study on EVs. I think this is a very political issue. You started with this and you concluded with the vote, so you showed that it's a very political issue. But I was wondering how the political consensus was created to support this kind of policies, and maybe I would extend my question also to energy efficiency, maybe. If you identify some tensions during the decision-making process to do this policy, if there were some, what kind of, let's say, opposition it may created within the government, but also outside, and whether in your paper you also look into the, let's say, different approach between the individualization of this environmental just policy, if we can put just here, versus the collective one. I think you touched upon that point when you said that the public transport, for example, was not really tackled. So EVs is typically an individual policy, whereas public transport is a political one. And usually we say that collective also has to be tackled. Thank you. Sorry for this.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. So regarding your first question about the comparison with Germany, from my understanding and reading of the literature, Germany was a big inspiration for us when it comes to green discourse. So the paper will for sure touch upon that. And about the subnational level, I didn't plan on touching upon it that much because from my understanding of the literature, it didn't have that big of an impact. Whereas I want to touch upon it more is, even if the Green Party wasn't elected, how big of an impact did it still have on the programs of other parties, because just because a party didn't get members into the parliament, at least in Slovenia, it still majorly impacted the discourse that other, especially leftist parties used, and then adapted their programs based on what they were saying. So that's the part that I want to focus on.
Thank you for this question. About the area. When I started the PhD course, I would like to explain the history of the world. But it is not possible because we have a limited money, time, etc., skills also. So interview I've conducted them to Italian activists. So these outcomes are available for Italian contest. For the other point about background result, I look in background of the activists from the point of view of their personal sentiments, feelings, and also from the point of view of their previous struggles, previous mobilization. It is useful to understand also the presence of an environmental struggles in a specific territory. I don't know if I answer well. We can also talk later. Okay.
Thank you for the question. I must say before starting that I only joined the team 6 months ago, so I was not part of this expedition specifically, so I only have second-hand information. But from what I've understood, they involved 200 citizens in the municipality, everyone who wanted. And I think was quite of a varied group. And this initial phase was just to understand which challenge they wanted to work on, what was important for them. And then out of these 200, they selected a number that I don't remember, in between 40 and 50, that really engaged in the old backcasting expedition. So they envisioned together the state they wanted to reach, or more backcasting from principle, so not a specific vision. They compared it to the current state, and then they identified leverage points and how to go about it. I hope this answered the question. And it was a varied group between teenagers to elderly, so it was quite composite.
Yeah, so thank you for your questions. How the political consensus around these policies was created to support it? Well, Serbia is not actually making political consensus on anything these days. And when I say these days, I mean for the last 10 years. Basically, there wasn't any kind of major debate related to these two policies. Most of, as I said, at least one of those is funded from EBRD and from different international funds. So basically, we negotiated it with them. We do have the deficit of democracy and a lot of, from EU Progress Report to other international organizations, relevant reports do claim that, and that actually created a context where we don't talk that much about specific solutions and policy regardless the topic. However, when we're talking about this specific one, the political opposition to it was we didn't have the opposition in the parliament back then due to the boycott of the elections, but there was an opposition, especially from green spectrum of political parties, from two political parties majorly, and I presented the policies that were their case actually that can be alternative to this. The first one was investment to public transport rather than investing in individualization of an environmental issue, basically, and that's the part of the answer to third question. We do have one of the lowest rates of persons per car, per vehicle in the traffic, some 1.1, 1.2 per car, meaning that one bus can take out more than 120 cars per street, especially in capital and some major cities which do have public transportation that is not that reliable. That's one of the reasons why actually people use cars. And the second one was, again, something that I would probably like to rediscuss in future papers. The second proposal and the second alternative was coming from the other Green Party, which asked, because one of the crucial problems with for the citizens as beneficiaries for renovations is down payment. You need to have 50% in advance, which is practically impossible for a majority of the people who do have situation of energetic poverty, especially. So they proposed the alternative of ESCO loans, basically turning city heating companies into loan providers that will not actually ask for any down payment, and they will not actually ask for any kind of investment. You will just going to keep paying the heating or the electricity bill in the same level until you pay back the debt, and that's it. But just one city in Serbia actually implemented it as their official policy. It did provide some results. But one of the crucial problems actually with these policies, I said for this one, they're targeting wealthier individuals already. None of these policies is actually taking into consideration many that are left behind who actually cannot afford the down payment or the electric car.
Lep pozdrav vsem skupaj. Jaz bom vprašanje postavil v slovenskem jeziku. Lahko bi ga tudi v srbo-hrvaškem, vendar ostali ne bodo razumeli. Kolegu, ki je predstavil Zelene stranke v Sloveniji, lahko dopolnim zadevo, da je bila do sedaj, recimo razen če spustimo tisto prvo zeleno gibanje oziroma zeleno stranko, ki je pomagalo pri osamosvojitvi Slovenije, v zadnjem obdobju nekih 10 let TRS, to se pravi gibanje in stranka za trajnostni razvoj, ki je bila v sklopu zelene oziroma združene levice, vendar je dejansko ta zelena opcija, ko so kolegi prišli v parlament, dejansko izgubila in se preselila na to ideološko raven, ne. In tudi druga stvar, kaj je problem? Problem je v tem, da so zelena gibanja v Sloveniji dejansko premalo povezana ali pa premalo usmerjena k nekemu skupnemu cilju, vsak si nekako krepi svoj določen vrt, mogoče tudi tukaj malo nekako egoizma voditeljev, ki dejansko ne iščejo nekih kompromisov. Tukaj lahko govorim tudi, da dejansko ob vstopu v Slovenijo, vstopu teh strank oziroma zelenih gibanj se izgubi nekaj radikalnosti, ne. To se pravi, ker je pač politika umetnost kompromisov, je potrebno nekako nekje popustiti, da nekaj dobiš. In tukaj pri teh zelenih, se pravim, jaz pogrešam res dejansko tiste zelene projekte, zelene koncepte, ki bi dejansko bili usmerjeni za ljudi in pa za družbo, ne pa samo za neke ozke interese, ne. Mi smo imeli tudi recimo, ne vem, zeleno stranko, to se pravi, ko smo rekli v 90-ih letih, ki je dejansko razpadla zaradi, kot ste dobro omenili tudi, pa verjetno, ki je prebral zaradi notranjih konfliktov, ne. To se pravi, so šli nekako, ne vem, mogoče egoizem, mogoče tukaj tudi, ne mogoče, verjetno tudi pomagala kakšna opcija, ki je želela razbiti zeleno stranko, da ne bi postala tako močna, ne, po principu deli in vladaj, ne, tako kot so recimo tudi različna gibanja zelena propadla v Ameriki ali pa popolnoma spremenila svojo agendo iz okoljskih gibanj v gibanja, ki so dejansko postala podpora kapitalu in tukaj pač jaz res resnično pogrešam neke zelene koncepte oziroma imamo neko vesno stranko, ki je nastala lansko leto, vendar se pravim, ne pogrešam to ali pa mi je to nekako tuje, da ko so ti ljudje vstopili v politiko, so izgubili, bom rekel, tisto svojo radikalnost, ki bi pač bila potrebna danes pri vseh teh težavah, ki jih imamo tako na lokalni kot globalni ravni, peljati naprej, ne.
Ja, sam rekel bi, da se strinjam, sploh glede na to, kar sem prebral o teh notranjih konfliktih, da je to en izmed glavnih razlogov, zakaj je to tako zelo porazno, kakor je, no. Hvala.
Imam težave, ne vem, kako bi zdaj govoril, v slovenščini, v angleščini, ampak bom vztrajal v tem zadnjem duhu, ki se je vzpostavil. Kratek komentar glede notranjih konfliktov v zeleni stranki. Mi lahko razlagamo to iz osebnih karakteristik ali pa povezavi na kapitalske ambicije neke frakcije v zelenih strankah. Jaz sem bolj nagnjen k temu, da bi raziskoval politično stranko zelenih v Sloveniji skozi različne okoljske diskurze, ki so bili prisotni v posameznih skupinah, ki so bili vključeni in sodelovali znotraj stranke. In to je potem razlog tudi vseh teh konfliktov, ki jih pa sicer razlagamo skozi osebne karakteristike. To se pravi, gre za psihologizacijo vzrokov. Če gre za psihologizacijo, imamo probleme, da pa lahko ljudi samo izključiš ali ne, ne pa da jih, bom rekel, soočaš in reflektiraš z njihovimi lastnimi predstavami, mislimi, skratka omejami tega okoljskega diskurza. Zakaj je to pomembno? Ker poznamo to problem v Srbiji, poznamo, da imate v posameznih sferah družbe, ki so relativno zaprte, specifične okoljske diskurze, ki pa jih nikakor ne morete povezati v neko zelo močno stranko ali pa gibanje ali pa kaj takega. Skratka, tle imamo problem, kako misliti to razliko zato, da bi lahko prišlo do ene močne kontrapozicije moči, ki bi se lahko prebila tudi iz teh parcialnih družbenih balončkov v javni sferi, v javno sfero, oblikovala javno mnenje, ki bi bilo sicer različno, ampak mi vemo, kdo je slon v sobi. Drugače se usmerimo drug pro drugemu in hočemo zeleni prepričevati zelene, oziroma iz različnih diskurzov prepričevati drugega, kjer ima bolj prav, naslona pa pozabimo v sobi. Tle se mi zdi, bom rekel, zelo pomemben problem, kako te različne okoljske diskurze, ki se porodijo znotraj teh posameznih skupin, kako jih nadgraditi v neko meta, rečemo. O tem je Drajze govoril, Žan, ti si ga omenil, Drajze govoril, kako te diskurze analizirati in kako jih dvigati, pokazati na njihovo notranjo mejo in to mejo razrešuje drugi diskurzi, kar pomeni, da se morajo posamezni akterji, in to je tisto, kar se mi zdi najtežji, zavedati svoje lastne meje diskurza, ki ga na nek način ubesedujejo. In prepustiti tam, ki ne vejo, ko se nek diskurs ukvarja z nekim drugim poudarkom okoljski problematiki, da ga vključi v svojega. Temu se reče povečevanje mišljenja, enlargement thought, to, o čemer je Arendtova govorila. In tle se mi zdi, da imamo zelo velik problem pri oblikovanju diskurzivne koalicije, o kateri je pa kolegica govorila na eksperimentalni ravni. Zdaj, to je, bom rekel, sem tak kratek komentar. Tisto, kar se mi zdi pri vseh premislekih glede države in vloge države problematično in ki se ga v tej sferi, ko razpravljamo o okoljski tranziciji, pa pravični tranziciji, da pozabljamo na eno bazično vprašanje in to je liberalno-demokratska politična ureditev. Mi imamo družbo strukturirano, razvitem kapitalizmu, imamo družbo strukturirano, imamo državo, imamo civilno družbo, imamo civilne družbe gibanja in imamo tudi javno sfero, kjer so noter mediji, javna mnenja in tako naprej. Ne postavljamo si vprašanje, ali je res lahko znotraj te strukture, ne da bi jo spremenili, ne da bi jo transformirali, lahko realiziramo politike, za katere se zavzemamo. Kar pomeni, bom rekel, da se mi ukvarjamo v glavnem z policy problemi, povezavami z gibanji in znanostjo ali pa stroko, z temi mehkimi segmenti in se tukaj akcijsko izčrpavamo, namesto da bi postavili tudi vprašanje, kako sistemsko spremeniti liberalno-demokratsko ureditev, ne tisto, kar nam ponuja. Dajte ustanoviti zeleno stranko, imate možnost gibanja, imate možnost oblikovati zeleno javno sfero za medije in tako naprej. Ali je dost, da to naredimo, ali je treba bolj radikalno postaviti vprašanje liberalno-demokratske države? To je zame kot politologa zelo pomembno vprašanje. Jaz, bom rekel, vam to dam na mizo. Moj odgovor gre v smeri Ecology, ki je pisala knjigo Zelena država. Mi smo jo v Sloveniji prevedli. Tema, kako izideti iz liberalno-demokratske države v zeleno državo, ki se bistveno in radikalno spremeni, kljub temu, da ohranja vse elemente liberalne države, ampak hkrati sistemsko zgradi kontramoči, ki postopoma najeda in omogoča, da se udejanjajo tudi druge koncepti, politik, kot so, bom dal sem tak primer, v Sloveniji imamo ministrstva in znotraj ministrstva imate že oblikovane posamezne oddelke, ki zagovarjajo druge koncepte. Ministrstvo za infrastrukturo govori o trajnostni mobilnosti, ne več samo o avtomobilizmu kot dominantni ideologiji. Znotraj ministrstva za kmetijstvo ne govorimo več samo o, in tudi institucionalizirano ni več samo politika agrobiznisa, ampak je tudi trajnostna predelava hrane. In tako bi lahko pogledali, v vseh teh ministrstvih se že institucionalizira moč in moč udejanja drugega koncepta. Te, bom rekel, smo premalo senzibilni, mi državo naslavljamo kot tako, ne da bi videli, kako se že država sama v sebi institucionalno transformira in gradi sama v sebi svoje institucionalne kontramoči, ki omogočajo udejanje nekega drugega koncepta. In to so nastavki, po moje, za to transformacijo iz liberalne demokratske naprej. Poudarek je na komunikacijskih formah, ki jih je treba začeti misliti in kako graditi te komunikacijske forme, zato da ta institucionalni aranžma dopolnijo, pa hkrati uvajajo nove prakse, tudi skozi drugačne procedure, ne hierarhične, ampak deliberativne. In tukaj se mi zdi, da je treba znotraj politične ekologije tudi začeti razmišljati o tem policy, se pravi o tej institucionalnem aranžmaju. Hvala.
Okay, then let's thank our first group once again. Thank you. The next presenters, Zorana, Alexandra, Kozma, Anna Maria, and Sara.
The theme for this essay is trial and resistance of lithium mining in Serbia. I don't have PowerPoint. I'm literally going to read it from here, so I hope you don't have a problem with that. And if you do, your choice. Like, literally. Okay, so we live in a world where every day we see the destruction of environment, oh my God, and the people are like the main source of destruction. The changes in people behavior lead more and more often to environmental problems that affect the natural balance of the environment. And the way to solve these and other environmental problems that grow day by day is to protect the environment itself, which is of vital importance. Now we can protect the environment, whether with laws or by our own creation of some decisions that will make our life easier and easier for the nature. Environmental degradation can result from depletion of natural resources, which would be accompanied by negative effects to the economic growth of the affected areas. Lithium has unique characteristics, and that is one thing that I'm doing in this paper. It's the lightest metal on Earth and has the lowest density of all solid elements in its normal state, which makes lithium a key element of a successful energy transition. The European Union, we have you here, is one of the world's largest consumers of lithium. However, the European Union does not produce it, but imports it primarily from China, which is why the pressure is growing in Europe to independently develop its own lithium deposits, as well as to produce the raw material for lithium batteries locally. The senior geologist of the German Mineral Resources Agency, Michael Schmidt, I hope I said that right, told Demostat that more than 15 lithium mining projects are currently in various stages of development in Europe, and we have one in Serbia. It is necessary to reduce Europe's dependence on China, which, when it comes to the key raw material for batteries, in order to achieve this, Europe must also exploit its own lithium deposits. But Europe itself has the potential to mine and process some of the lithium it needs, but also the European Union is aware that in order for this to happen, it is necessary to overcome obstacles, primarily protests by the local population and long project approval procedures, and also to meet high environmental standards. The story of lithium in Serbia began 19 years ago, precisely 2004, when permission was given to carry out geological research in our country, and the new mineral, jadarit, was discovered, but it was officially recognized as a new mineral in 2006. The deposit in Serbia is by far Europe's largest hard rock lithium deposits. The permit for these geological explorations was given to a company called Rio Sava Exploration, and this led to a series of protests across the country. In January of 2022, Serbia canceled the project after fierce protests. Rio Tinto, however, stands by its plan, and there are hints that our government may change its negative stance. Everything that can be found on Rio Tinto's website sounds good, like we're going to give you new employment places, higher pays, and everything, but the citizens of Serbia did not like it, so Rio Tinto had to stop everything that they were doing. In September of 2021, a series of environmental protests began in Belgrade and other locations in Serbia. It was like spread very, very fast. The protesters demanded the rejection of Rio Tinto's mine investment and the withdrawal of proposed changes to the expropriation and referendum laws. Even though Rio Tinto was given permission by the government, the project that Rio Tinto had received so much criticism from environmental activists and academics, stating the possibility that the project could pollute the nearby environment. Amidst the protests, changes to the expropriation law and law on referendum were proposed to the National Assembly of Serbia. So organizations, activists, politicians alleged that the laws were connected to the Rio Tinto. In December of 2021, Rio Tinto's spatial plan was abolished, and the government in Serbia annulled all contracts with Rio Tinto in January of 2022. However, the protests continued all up to dissolution of the National Assembly of 15th of February. People were afraid that what would happen to our nature, plants, animals, and what impact will it have on us as a society. Of course, the image of Rio Tinto has in the general public also contributed to all of that. People got information about what and how Rio Tinto did business in some other countries of the world, how much good they brought to the country where they were located, and how much nature they destroyed. And nobody in Serbia liked it. However, the one more reason for the anger felt by the people should also be added here, which is the attitude of the government and the behavior of the political officials we have in Serbia. So that's it.
Okay, I hope I word properly. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you hear me well. Okay, so my study aims to investigate the new way of interpreting the data on attitudes towards climate change. The data I am talking about were collected in Poland, and I will try to show you how to interpret this data in a kind of new way in the context of three very interesting theories from the field of political psychology, which is the management theory, the authoritarianism, and conspiracy thinking. So at the beginning, I will shortly elaborate on the crucial information about these three concepts I just told you about. So the first one of them is the authoritarianism, which is a theory based on three components. First one is authoritarian submission, which means following authorities and strong charismatic leaders and just doing what they say to do. The second one is conventionalism, which is the belief that there is a specific defined set of values to follow, and everyone of us should follow just this group of values. And the third component is the authoritarian aggression, which is basically the result of the two previous components, as a reaction for breaking the rules and breaking the convention. And the second perspective is so-called conspiracy thinking, which explains basically the way conspiracy theories are created and how they work in the society, which can shortly be described by the tendencies to strenuously looking for connections between events and the rejection of everything that seems too probable and too simple as an explanation of what's happening in reality. And the third perspective is the radicalization as a reaction to climate change in the light of the terror management theory, which is based on the fact that people radicalize their view if they are exposed to the thought of death. The most important elements connected with this theory to remember are just the tendencies to radicalization, to the aggression and the polarization, and also following the charismatic leaders. And just coming back to my study, analyzing the data from Poland I told you about, it turned out that the highest levels of climate denialism are noted among right-wing orientations. And the other interesting group from this data set are the centrists, who score one of the highest percentages of climate denialism as well. And what is also worth mentioning is that these results are consistent with the nationwide surveys, which are like the only official source of information on the psychological profiles of electorates in Poland. So all of these surveys confirm the tendency that right-wing parties' electorates are the more skeptical about climate change. And the results may be like intuitive for you and like seem like nothing new, but this was not actually the aim of the study. The aim was just to show that there are some specific psychological criteria and theories with maybe an interesting and new way to investigate attitudes toward climate change. So that was like the aim of the study, to show something new and to show some uninvestigated fields we can interpret social attitudes towards climate change. So, yep, that's it. Thank you.
Our next presenter is Cosma.
Yeah, I will need slides. That's all right. Okay, can you hear me all right? Yeah. It's a cool microphone. It's like a Pilates class microphone. Yeah, so I will try to stick to 5 minutes. I will put a timer on. So my name is Cosma. I'm doing PhD at Uppsala University. And this paper is preliminary called Tracing Cross-Color Interconnectedness in a Transforming Coldscape, the case of Polish Silesia. So basically what I want to do in this paper is to propose interconnectedness as a guiding research principle that can kind of guide 3 scales of interconnectedness. So trace interconnectedness between humans and non-human environment, between humans and humans, and between humans and global capitalism. So I guess the kind of initial idea or the theoretical standpoint that I start with is that there is a big debate in academia whether extending agency onto non-humans is helpful or it's actually making it more difficult to make research political. And what I'm trying to argue is actually that engaging with non-humans and tracing interconnectedness doesn't have to be apolitical and indeed can lead to politically engaged research. So I'm using the concept of interconnectedness from object-oriented ontology by Timothy Merton. So it's a very kind of intuitive concept. It just basically says that we can't exist without other beings. And of course, some inspirations from political ecology, like Matthew Huber, who said that the ecologies of interdependence took a wrong turn towards lifestyle environmentalism, while indeed they could have just acknowledged relationality between people all being subjected to capitalist exploitation, and that would lead to protest and opposition. And the same with Jason Moore and his concept of cheap nature, when he kind of puts humans and nature together as all exploited by capitalism. And of course, the critique of carbon dioxide emissions fetishism, which can lead to putting too much attention on reducing carbon dioxide emissions by all means possible, instead of kind of looking for other ways of tackling climate change. And this fetishization of carbon dioxide can lead to solutions such as carbon capture and storage and so on. So I've been tracing this interconnectedness in my fieldwork. I've done ethnographic fieldwork in Upper Silesia. It's a hard coal mining region in the south of Poland, and I've conducted 28 interviews, 10 with miners and people from mining industry. So I will concentrate on these 10. The others are with environmental activists and queer activists. So some examples of human and non-human interconnectedness. I won't be reading these quotes for you, but they are there for you to have a look at. So you might think that it's unusual for miner to express some kind of feeling of interconnectedness with nature, but actually I spoke to some miners who expressed that. For example, an active miner who is fascinated by finding fossils during his work, and he collects them, he takes them home, and he talks about them as an heirloom of nature. So it's kind of this connects nature, creates this family-like relationship with nature by calling coal an heirloom of the past. Then we have also examples of miners who kind of connect coal to human effort and toil and sweat, and they compare it to the earth, the wealth of our earth. And when I asked this miner, but how does he feel about the exploitation of environment and the pollution and the destruction and the carbon dioxide emissions, he said, well, we create symbiosis with the environment. We can't escape affecting it, but we need to take care of it and kind of limit the exploitation as much as possible. And there's also another miner who already quit, and he says that he has coal in his body still, that it's kind of part of him, that he feels very connected to it, that it kind of gets under your skin. So there's these expressions of very interesting interconnectedness between human and non-human, and now with human and human. So this kind of another scale of interconnectedness is when miners feel connection to each other. There are different distinguishing marks that they recognize each other by, so bald calves and what they call mascara eyes. So the eyes and eyelashes are the most difficult to wash after the shift and wash away the dust, the coal dust. So you can spot a miner within Upper Silesia because you can see that they have dark kind of eyelashes. So that's how they recognize each other, and it's kind of this kind of insight information way of recognizing another miner. And also this being together in a dangerous situation creates this herd behavior that is both good and bad. It can lead to looking out for one another, seeing mine as a one organism that supports each other. And also this interconnectedness translates to other humans. It's not also between miners, it can also be between people in the region and the local community. So mines are considered hearts of the region. They kind of pump the life into the region. And miners also worry not only about themselves, because actually they realize that they will be fine because they will get the early retirement and so on. But what about people working in related or indirect industries, like lady in the kiosk and things like that? And then there's also example of miners' union that actually started cooperating with environmentalists. So first they held empowerment workshops for miners, and then that led to recognition that they need to speak to environmentalists. And after initial animosity during this meeting, they actually started to talk, and that culminated in a visit of Greta Thunberg to Upper Silesia, which was very like a big media thing. And some miners and people from the mining industry are also aware of interconnectedness or kind of being caught up in the links to global capitalism. So, for example, this mine engineer I spoke to, he talks about how it's all ruled by economy rather than concerns about environment when he talks about just transition. That, of course, we can phase out coal, but he says the problem is constantly increasing needs and the consumption. So it's not a matter of this, it's just kind of a matter of addressing our relation with Mother Earth. He also questions the justice of just transformation. He says that, yes, of course, it will happen, we will phase out coal, but the money for just transition will be kind of taken by all the parties that find political interest in using this money, and it will not be used for things that it should be used for. And another miner expresses this outrage about the absurdities of green transition and the constant feeling of being manipulated either by the government or the miners' unions. And he's actually a nature photographer in his free time, and he's trying to protect nature. And but he finds it difficult because subsidies are not enough. He can't afford PV installations anyway. And he thinks that Poland is basically turning from a producer country to a consumer country, and he can see a lot of Amazon warehouses and so on cropping out around the region. So he's just worried about the situation where mines will be replaced with Amazon warehouses. So yeah, I'm a bit over time, but just to sum up, so I think tracing this interconnectedness can be useful ethnographically. It could be a useful research guiding principle. It can contribute to a more comprehensive analysis, less essentialism and reductionism within academia. So it can be helpful for academic to also use it in the research to be aware of interconnectedness and not focus on one area and propose solutions in this area. But beyond academia, perhaps kind of publicizing these results of research can lead to solidarity with natural world and building alliances between environmentalists and miners. So thanks for listening.
Nice. Could you maybe also put a timer for me, because I'm passionate about the topic, might go over time. I'll try to not do so. Well, thank you for being here, and also, great, my apologies, like I'm at the beginning of my research, so what I'm presenting is highly exploratory and some preliminary analysis, but nevertheless, I think it's worth talking about the food system as well, as it causes like 27% of anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions. Well, so at the beginning of my research, and I was thinking, what can I talk about here, what makes sense? And so I was looking through some pictures which I took at during my ethnographic fieldwork in Argentina, and then I came up with this picture, and I remembered a quote of an interview partner which told me, you know, a lot of times I ask myself why we ended up here, why didn't we succeed in transitioning to an agroecological food system? And I thought, well, that's a good question. I'll try to look into that in more detail and maybe find some insightful aspects, and that's what I'm talking about now. So why do transition dynamics vanish, or what are barriers to such transitions? And I'm taking a look at this very specific case study in the Valle Inferior in Rio Negro in Argentina. So it's an agroecological movement. Just some visual insights in how I work or who I work with. And so to make it a bit more transparent, like this research is very much shaped by me and and the actors and the people I work with. So it's mostly people from Bolivia that immigrated to Argentina to find a better living there, that work in the agricultural sector. And I do mostly participatory methods, like working in the field with the people. Of course, it's also like interviews and other stuff, but that's my approach to it. And I think it's also important to show maybe my positionality as I'm trying to adapt some decolonial perspectives as well. So I'm looking at this question, these big questions, why do transition dynamics not succeed in the end, from a specific point of view, like applying this conceptual interdisciplinary framework, which is informed by critical state theory, social capital, mostly a Putnamian conceptualization, maybe if you know it, and also territoriality. So I'll not dive into it as it is a wide field, but I guess I can explain some parts when I'm turning to the outcomes. So here I tried to summarize the actor network that is kind of involved in this agroecological movement in Argentina. And it shows quite clearly that there are a lot of structural bonds, like structural social capital is just like network ties that existed. So the social movement was able to build a lot of network ties with actually all the main stakeholders and governmental actors, but they could not be sustained throughout time. So what happened that with all state actors but one, breaks occurred, and this was mostly due to a lacking cognitive social capital. Like cognitive social capital is something we would understand as a common vision of the future, like understanding of the agricultural future in Argentina. This also points at a very important fact, like connected to critical state theory, like that the government or the state should not be viewed as one homogeneous identity, but it's rather a very complex set of institutions that come together and that also aim for different goals and interests. And also within these institutions, different interests are being aimed at. And this is highly important, especially when power relations come into play. And in this case study, like all the governmental actors with which breaks occurred, like the heads of these actors, they were mostly directed towards conventional agriculture. So there are differences within institutions which might open up windows of opportunity, but of course also act as barriers. Okay, then another lack in cognitive social capital, which I unearthed throughout this research, was that there was a lack of a common understanding of the definition of agroecology, which turned out being a major problem and caused some misunderstandings and also frauds, and and ended up in major conflicts. So I think it's also crucial to talk about concepts and how to define specific concepts when going towards a specific transition, because only like this we can safeguard that they are not diluted or co-opted. So an aspect of relational social capital I wanted to point out is that within this group there was a lack of a shared identity, which is a major aspect for the success of such networks and such movements with a specific goal of, in this case, transitioning to an agroecological food production system. So the openness was given, they were open to a lot of actors being involved, but this closeness and this shared identity was not given and ended up as being a major barrier. And lastly, as I'm a geographer, I want to link it also to the biophysical space and want to point out that it's not only social relations, but it's highly interconnected with the biophysical space. So in the end, one major rupture that occurred was due to this agroecological movement making territorial claims and opting against the conventional onion production, which is very dominant in the area. So just to give you an example, it's highly speculative. They're mostly export-oriented to the Brazilian market, and they also use, like a farmer told me, DTT. So it has high impacts, not only on the workers of conventional agriculture, but also like on the whole area and also on the water bodies. So it showed quite clearly that as soon as territorial claims were made, ruptures occurred. Like when this niche development tried to go out of their niche and their, like where they were accepted from a political point of view, well, cooperation was not occurring anymore. And I think this shows also quite clearly the importance of territory and how it is socially produced, and it has major implications then again on these social movements. And with this, I want to link it to inequalities. It is the topic of our summer school also. So I wanted to emphasize also that there is this materialization of power and interest in the territory. And I found a very explanatory example in this case study, and I call it like a negative symbiosis because, just to explain it shortly, agroecological producers are not the owners of the land, and they don't have like any official contracts. And as soon as these onion producers come and they're like have a lot of capital, especially when production in Brazil drops, they have well, a lot of money to invest, and they will expand to these producers that were formerly on these fields. So agroecological producers get expelled from the territory, and after 3 years like of conventional onion production, the soil is depleted, farmers move to somewhere else, and land prices drop. And so agroecological producers come back to these lands because it gets accessible for them. And with their agroecological practices, they actually refertilize the land, make it valuable again, and then the vicious circle starts again. So here, I think it has to be closely looked at that these transition processes are also reproducing inequalities. And I think we need to look specifically at these parts, and also another aspect are self-exploitational practices, not only of activists, that were like telling me we're working for free, exploiting ourselves, that the state is actually profiting from it by getting higher, like a better image and being visible, and but also farmers, of course, because they get the same prices for their produce that is agroecologically produced, like implying a lot of more workforce, and yeah, but still like get the same amount of money and auto-exploit themselves. And this is also a lot of connected to gender aspects, as it is women in the area that are promoting agroecological practices. And with that, and over time, thank you.
Thank you, Anna Maria. Now we turn to our final presenter of this group session, that is Nada.
Like this?
No.
Yeah. Okey-dokey. Hello. Good morning. Okay, my name is Sara, and I'm from Sweden, and I'm starting my PhD research now. And it will be about just transition in Gothenburg municipality from the point of view of spatiality. Gothenburg is a very segregated city, and hence this is a very important thing. For this, this research report is like the starting point for my research, and as such, I've started to like look at the steering documents that the municipality uses when they work with the environmental transition and when they are working with social equality. So there are one is the environmental program, and then you have this program for an equal Gothenburg. And as we also heard yesterday, it's also the case for Gothenburg that these two works or programs that the municipality are carrying out are very much separated and not integrated with each other. So I started with looking at these two documents to see not what they do at a starting point, but rather to see what are they saying that they are going to do as a starting point. So the programs have goals and sub-goals, and I have went through all of them just to see, are they referring to each other, and how can they be understood in a framework from just transition theory. Because I have the focus of the Gothenburg municipality and want to look into how does possibilities and negative effects distribute in space equally or unequally, what are the structure of it, I have decided to work with the transition the theory of climate, energy, and environmental justice. So taking like a holistic view, but always from the point of view of spatiality, because it's always in space. That said, I'm not looking into labor, just transition from a labor perspective around industry, for example, or not looking into socio-technical value chain, just transition, which is super important, but not the focus for my study. So looking into the two programs, it's important to state that the environmental program was written later than An Equal Gothenburg. Therefore, I looked through that more specifically, like how does it refer to an equal Gothenburg? Because this program for equality couldn't refer to a document that will come later on. So what we see is that the three goals that are, the three sub-goals that the environmental program, where it refers to an equal Gothenburg, has to do with good air quality, good sound environment, and access to green areas. And all these three sub-goals, they all relate to the local environment, the neighborhood area, the living conditions in a living area. It is important to think of, like, when we have the sub-goals where they actually do refer to each other, then how are they going to measure it? How are they going to look into the good air quality, sound environment, and green areas. Some of the goals have like that everyone in Gothenburg should have at least this good quality, measurement of good air quality, but some of them are targeted as a yearly increase. So if you have a yearly increase, for example, when it comes to noise from traffic in different neighborhoods or close to schools, but you don't have a target that everyone should have the same level of good sound quality, you really need to look at the spatiality, but this they do not do. So it's important to put the spatial aspect on these issues. Then it's very important to look also like what, this is where they do refer to an equal Gothenburg, but there are many sub-goals that do not refer to an equal Gothenburg, or like where they do not recognize that there is a social dimension to the environmental policies that they put through. And I will not go through all the sub-goals, but the big, like as we have talked about before, like, and also the big areas where it's noted to highlight is infrastructure or traffic, like the emission from private car ownership, and also the energy consumption from housing. Neither of them are related to a social dimension, and they are not, of course, then also put like a social aspect to it. Here they only do the targets of like a percentage, how much is it gonna decrease in terms of percentage, and it's nothing like saying where in the city or which income groups should decrease their energy consumption or emission consumption the most. So this is a big point where it should be highlighted more in the future. And it's also interesting that the 3 places where they actually talk about that it has an equality aspect with good air quality and good sound environment, both of them actually refers to traffic, because traffic is what is the main polluter and the main driver of noise. But still, traffic is not seen as something that has to do with the equality. Yes. So I think, like as I said, this is very much like the starting point of my research, and I will look more into also like the work that they do and how they are trying or not trying, perhaps more, integrate the work for social equality and environment. But it's important to start with like how do you pose that you are gonna do it. And it leaves a lot to want and need in terms specifically for energy justice and climate justice. It's not really addressed at all in terms of the household consumption. Whilst the environmental justice are perhaps a little bit more where access to green area, but you could still like make it better with also looking into the quality of the green areas that you would have access to. Yes. But I guess it's like the big elephant in the room in a high-income society that could we like talk about people's different levels of climate footprint, because that's where it comes back to. And this would be interesting to do in a spatial dimension, since Gothenburg is very much segregated and the socioeconomic status and the spatiality are interconnected. So, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Do we have any question?
I have two, if I may. Sorry, I cannot remember your name, but Upper Slezjaga, if I may. First of all, very interesting research. I have a question. You mentioned also interviewing some other people, apart from the miners. How do you, like, what was the rationale behind, and where do you want to go with your research, maybe with this different groups? And other questions for Sarah. Sarah, right? Okay. Again, I'm also trying to work on the CE justice, so I'm a bit
stuck as well because there is not much literature on, this holistic approach to just transition and kind of bringing together, like the climate, energy, environmental aspects. How do you do it, or did you manage to do it so far, or what's your take on it? Thank you.
Yeah, so the rationale was that I'm required to produce 4 articles in a neoliberal academia. So I need to, and I'm allowed to go to the field only like once for 3 months to south of Poland, and then once for 3 months I will be going next year, but to a different region. So that was my only time in this region, and I thought I need to collect all the data that I want to use for my future articles. So, and I also want to write about potential alliances between the queer movement and environmental movement, and maybe link the three, the labor and the environment and the queer movement. But also was interested in seeing how identity changes, how kind of petromasculine, toxic masculine coal identity can be disassembled with a queer movement, whether queer movement sees opportunity to move beyond patriarchy in the region that's linked to mining sometimes. So that was the rationale behind interviewing queer movements too. But in this paper, I was focusing only on minors because that's the focus of this paper. But the other interviews are for later.
I will use this. Okay. As for now, like this very beginning, I'm more like categorizing a bit how can certain aspects of the municipal work be understood as having climate, energy, or environmental impacts, like to highlight that there is like an holistic, that there are many different components in the spatial just transition. I think what you're asking for with good theoretical framework is also in front of me, to be honest. This is like, I started this Monday. Thank you.
We have time for 1 or maybe 2 quick questions.
Hi, thank you for your presentations. I would have a question for the Polish speakers, or specifically speaker 3. But often we hear, okay, for the just transitions, we just need to get minors into other jobs. We need to somehow reschool them and give them a new job where they can put their pride in a way. And I also, I was in a project once, which was about the coal transition. And this was kind of also the outcome of the policy brief. And even back then I thought, okay, I don't know if this means much without clear success stories or clear examples. So I was wondering if you maybe know anything about that, or if you say this would be the perfect new job field for minors. And it also reflects back to the presentation on the second day about the bad shit jobs. Where can they go? That's the question.
Yeah, I guess minors themselves already start saying that they actually will be fine with all the kind of policies in place, all the early retirements, and kind of relocating them to other mine until the other mine will close. They will all be able to kind of work until all mines close. At least that's what they start to realize, and that's what they tell me, the ones I talk to. But it's also not ideal for them because they don't really want to move, but they are forced to relocate to kind of like work until the retirement elsewhere. But some of them also say that all this talk about reskilling, because I think some NGOs and some actors say that actually minors are super equipped to work in other industries because they're all carpenters or plumbers or electricians. So it's super easy for them to reskill. And some minors tell me that it's not the case. It's very different, and it can't really be done that easily. But an interesting case is a couple of unions in Upper Silesia that was actually trying to transfer good practices to other industry, and they send a letter to the government that they will actually support development of wind industry in the region, but only if the government ensures that the companies that will come will facilitate creation of unions for the new workers, for the workers in the wind industry. So I thought that was quite nice that they are kind of accepting that their industry is phasing out, but they don't want to phase out the good practices of unionization and things like that.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We can now continue the discussion if there are any remaining questions or comments over a coffee break outside. But please be back at 11 for our third group. Thank you.